My name is Ember Rowan, and I grew up in a house where silence spoke louder than anyone inside it. I learned early that love wasn't always warm, it could be measured, rationed, handed out in uneven portions. My father, Grant, believed that approval was a currency you earned but rarely received. When I was 11, I dragged an old computer tower onto the kitchen table, its dusty insides crackling with possibility. I thought he might see what I saw: a doorway, a spark, a beginning. Instead, he glanced at the wires, at me, and dismissed it with a single sentence: waste of time. A moment later, my younger sister Serena showed him a drawing of a horse wearing a crown. He smiled, ruffled her hair, called her talented. His praise for her echoed in the room. His silence toward me echoed even louder. My mother softened the edges, but never stepped between us. That day, as I carried the computer back to the garage, something inside me settled into place, a quiet understanding that I was expected to take up less space, to want less, to be less. I didn't know the word for it then, but now I do: erasure. And once you learn to live in the shadows of your own home, it becomes frighteningly easy to believe that's where you belong. Growing up, I didn't realize how carefully a family could teach you to disappear. It happened slowly, like soundproofing layered into the walls of your own life. By the time I was a teenager, I understood my role without anyone having to say it out loud. I was the responsible one, the steady one, the daughter who didn't require attention because she knew how to swallow disappointment without choking on it. My name is Ember Rowan, and in those years, disappearing became a kind of survival. When Serena turned 16, she received a used silver car with a crooked bow on top. Everyone cheered, snapping photos as if it were a coronation. 2 months later, she scraped the passenger side against a concrete pillar. She cried, said it was an accident, and I believe her accidents happen. But somehow, the blame found its way to me. Grant said I should have taught her to park better, even though I'd never once been in the car with her. Serena didn't correct him. She just stared at the ground, letting the moment warp itself into a version that sheltered her and exposed me. That was the rhythm of our youth. She faltered, I absorbed. At school, I found glimpses of the world beyond the Rowan household: science labs, computer clubs, late nights spent chasing the thrill of solving a problem I wasn't sure I was qualified to touch. Every time something clicked, every time I cracked a line of code that felt like a locked door opening, I felt a little more alive. But at home, those victories evaporated. My certificates ended up tucked inside drawers, quietly filed away by my mother as though displaying them would disturb the balance of the house. Meanwhile, Serena's cheer trophies lined the hallway like a parade celebrating a future everyone had already agreed she deserved. Guests admired them. They admired her. No one asked what I loved. In my junior year, a counselor pulled me aside and told me I had a real shot at pursuing cybersecurity in college, a field that felt like it had been waiting for me long before I discovered it. I remember calling home, heart pounding with pride I rarely let myself show. Grant sighed, the sound heavy and tired, as if my ambition was a burden he'd been forced to carry. "So you're still chasing that?" he asked, as though everything that lit me up was a childish diversion. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me, and swallowed the heat rising in my throat. Serena, meanwhile, floated through her life with effortless certainty. Every update from her was treated like breaking news: new job offers, new admirers, new achievements that fit the image our family preferred. She shared them with me in a polite, detached tone, the way someone might comment on the weather. Interesting but not involving me. I don't think she meant to be cruel. She simply existed in a world where she expected to be celebrated, and I existed in one where I expected to be overlooked. What I didn't understand then, but do now, is how powerful expectation can be. When a family expects you to stay small, you learn to fold yourself accordingly. I made myself quiet to avoid conflict. I made myself helpful to avoid being a disappointment. I made myself invisible because somewhere along the line, invisibility felt easier than fighting to be seen. But the truth is, invisibility is exhausting. It wears grooves into your spirit, subtle at first, then unmistakable. I carried those grooves with me everywhere, into classrooms, into friendships, into every moment where I second-guessed my right to take up space. The world didn't silence me. My family trained me to silence myself. Still, in the quiet corners of those years, something in me resisted. Each project I built, each late-night debugging session, each problem I refused to abandon, those were the places I existed fully, without apology. Technology made sense to me in a way people never had. It didn't care how loud I spoke or how small I seemed. It didn't need me to be perfect or pleasing. It only needed me to keep trying. That should have been enough for my family, a daughter who worked hard, who stayed out of trouble, who carved a path without asking anyone to clear it for her. But it wasn't enough because they never really saw it. They saw what they expected. The responsible child, the one who would step in, step up, and step aside all at once. Looking back, I understand that youth isn't just the period when you grow, it's the period when you're shaped. And my youth shaped me into someone who knew how to endure, how to achieve quietly, how to be proud in private. It shaped me into someone who mistook being needed for being valued, someone who believed that love was a reward given only when you earned it. But there's something else youth shaped in me, something my family never intended. Every time they overlooked me, I built something of my own. Every time they underestimated me, I sharpened a skill they never noticed. Every time they handed their spotlight to Serena, I learned how to see clearly in the dark. And somewhere in that darkness, a different version of me began to form, someone who would one day stop apologizing for existing. I didn't realize how deeply a family could wound you until the night they celebrated Christmas without me. I was standing in an elevator, the doors sliding shut, when my phone lit up with a single message from our family thread. Dinner starts at 7 o'clock. Don't be late. Underneath it sat a photo, my family gathered around the table, every seat filled except the one that had always been mine. They hadn't forgotten me. They had simply gone on without me. The truth hit with a cold, familiar precision. I was never part of their plans. I was part of their convenience. By the time I reached my apartment, snow was drifting against the balcony glass, thick and silent. My phone buzzed again. A new email, no greeting, no explanation, no hesitation. A bill for $25,000 tied to Serena's car. My father's message was just one line: handle this before the end of the month. As if I were a service, not a daughter. As if my absence from Christmas was irrelevant, but my bank account was not. I set my keys down and let the weight of it all settle into the stillness of my kitchen. For years, I had accepted their expectation that I would quietly patch the tears in the fabric of our family. But something felt different that night, like the world had finally stopped spinning the way they expected it to. I stared at the glow of the screen, the numbers blurring slightly, less from emotion than from clarity. This wasn't a request. It was an assumption rooted so deeply in our history that they hadn't even considered whether I might say no. Then Serena texted, "Just take care of it." Dad's stressed. "It's not a big deal." Not a big deal, her favorite phrase, the one she used whenever she wanted her consequences to evaporate. She didn't ask how I was, or why I hadn't been invited, or whether I was even available. She simply expected. I sat down, the room dim except for the cold light of my laptop screen, and scrolled through the photo again. Serena laughing. Elise holding a tray of cookies. Grant carving a roast with the pride of a man certain his family was whole. My seat empty, like it had always been meant to stay that way. A knot tightened beneath my ribs, but it wasn't heartbreak, not this time. It was awareness. A sharp, quiet understanding that this moment wasn't an accident. It was the culmination of years. I opened my financial dashboard, rows of numbers glowing back at me, factual and unambiguous. Everything I had built, contracts, savings, investments, had been earned without them, without applause, without anyone asking if I needed help. They didn't know who I had become because they never cared to look. Yet now, on the night they excluded me, they reached for my resources as if they belonged to them. Instead of reacting with anger, my mind went still. I grabbed a notebook and wrote down the facts, one clean line at a time. Car loan, not mine. Borrowers, Serena and Grant. Christmas invitation, not extended. Pattern, contribution expected, presents optional. Seeing it written made something inside me lock into place. A boundary, not born of emotion, but of logic. I wasn't the one who broke this family. I was simply the one who had stopped pretending it wasn't already fractured. Snow pressed lightly against the window as I opened the message again. $25,000. A demand made without hesitation. A demand made because they believed I was still the Ember who absorbed blame like oxygen, who stepped in before being asked, who mistook obligation for love. But that Ember was beginning to fade. The truth settled in me like cold air in a quiet room. I didn't have to keep paying the price for a family that refused to see me. That night, Christmas didn't end something, it revealed it. It held up a mirror to every unspoken rule, every unequal expectation, every year I'd been asked to show up for a family that rarely showed up for me. And for the first time, I didn't look away. Betrayal didn't break me. It clarified me. It drew a line I should have drawn years ago. A line I would not step back over again. I once believed that breaking away from my family would feel explosive, like something loud and shattering, something that left debris behind. But the truth is quieter. It moves through you like a current, steady and undeniable. The night I finally chose myself, it didn't feel like rebellion. It felt like clarity. I sat in my dim kitchen, the laptop casting a pale glow across the counter. My fingers hovered over the financial documents the way they once hovered over that old computer tower at age 11, as if touching the truth might expose me. But this time, the truth wasn't fragile. It was liberating. I traced every detail of the car loan, line by line. My name wasn't on it. Not the registration, not the insurance, not the contract. The debt belonged to Serena and Grant, a closed loop that never should have included me. Yet they had tried to pull me into it the same way they had always pulled me into their mistakes, with expectation, not permission. For years, I had answered that expectation without question. I had stepped in, stepped up, and stepped out of my own way so they could feel comfortable. But sitting there, watching the numbers reflect the reality they refused to accept, something inside me hardened not in anger, but in resolve. I dialed the bank's customer service line. My voice was steady, almost unfamiliar in its certainty. "I need to report a vehicle for repossession," I said. There was no tremor, no hesitation. Just a clean line between what was mine and what wasn't. The operator asked for documentation. I provided everything, every screenshot, every attachment Grant had forwarded without considering the implications. When she asked my relationship to the owner, I answered simply, "I'm not responsible for this loan. The borrowers assume I'll fix it. I won't." There was a pause, the kind that feels like the world holding its breath. Then she confirmed the next steps. When I hung up, it felt like clicking off a light that had always flickered overhead, irritating, persistent, never mine to maintain. I didn't feel powerful. I felt aligned. I opened my email next. Their messages sat waiting, pulsing with expectation, Grant demanding urgency, Serena insisting it wasn't a big deal, Elise offering a soft confusion that nearly pulled at me, but not enough to sway me. I didn't read them. I opened a blank email instead and typed, "I won't be covering the bill. This is not my responsibility. Please handle it directly." No accusation. No apology. Just accuracy. I sent it. The moment the email left my outbox, the apartment seemed to shift. Not louder, lighter. As if something heavy had been set down at last. I closed the laptop and stood still, feeling the hum of the refrigerator, the faint buzz of city lights filtering through the window. Ordinary sounds, but for the first time, they felt like mine. I walked to the glass balcony door and watched the snow fall in slow spirals, each flake settling without asking permission. There was no guilt in me, no second-guessing, only the quiet realization that autonomy doesn't arrive with fanfare. It arrives with truth. For my entire life, I had been the family's first responder, the one who absorbed blame, who filled the gaps, who turned myself into a buffer for other people's chaos. But in that moment, I understood something simple and sharp. The role had never been mine to carry. I had accepted it because it was handed to me before I had the words to refuse it. Now I had the words, and I had used them. I turned off the kitchen light. In the sudden darkness, the room felt exact, intentional, unburdened. For the first time, the silence didn't feel like the consequence of being unseen. It felt like the beginning of being free. Morning arrived with a thin, brittle light, the kind that makes everything feel sharper than it should. My phone had been vibrating nonstop since dawn. Calls, messages, voicemails piling up like a storm gathering against my front door. I didn't listen to them. Instead, I made coffee, letting the warmth steady the edges of my thoughts. Only when the cup cooled did I finally press play. Grant's voice filled the voicemail box first controlled, clipped, simmering with disbelief. Amberly, call me back immediately. The second message was colder. This is not how family behaves. The third trembled with barely contained anger. There's a problem with the car. Call me now. I deleted them all. If he had ever listened to me like he expected me to listen to him, none of this would have surprised him. A text from Serena arrived next. What did you do? They came to the house. They're taking it. Dad is furious. This is your fault. Fault. A word they had spent years stitching to my name, as if it were part of my identity. But this time it didn't stick. I set the phone aside and finished my coffee slowly, feeling something settle inside me, a steadiness, almost like a spine I hadn't realized I'd been missing. By noon, I was at the office in Denver, the winter sun slicing through the glass walls like a blade. My co-founder, Kai, glanced up when I entered. Rough morning, he asked. I gave a small nod. He didn't press. That was one of the reasons I trusted him. He understood that silence can carry truth, not just avoidance. Throughout the day, my phone vibrated in my desk drawer, but I ignored it. I had a company to run, a life built on choices they had never been part of. That mattered more than whatever crisis they believed I had created for them. It was close to 5 when the elevator dinged in the hallway, an ordinary sound, but somehow heavy. Footsteps followed, too familiar to mistake. I turned as the door to my office cracked open. Grant stepped in first, the tension in his jaw sharp enough to cut. Serena hovered behind him, arms crossed, eyes shiny with indignation. Elise trailed last, her posture soft, apologetic, uncertain. We need to talk, Grant said, stepping inside as if the space belonged to him. I didn't stand. There's nothing to discuss. You had no right, he snapped. You embarrassed us. I felt the shift inside myself, clean, cold, undeniable. No, I said calmly. I stopped taking responsibility for choices I didn't make. He glared at me, stunned. For the first time, he seemed to notice the distance between us, not emotional, but structural. The office was my domain, a world I had built without his approval, without his money, without his shadow. He felt that shift, and it unsettled him. Family helps each other, he said sharply, pacing a half step forward. Family invites each other to Christmas, I replied. The truth landed like a stone between us. Serena flinched. Elise's breath caught, a soft, fragile sound. Grant pointed at my desk. At the phone he expected obedience to flow through. Call them. Fix this. I finally stood. Not in anger, but in certainty. I'm done being used. The room went still. Something pulled back inside him, anger giving way to recognition. Not respect, not understanding, but realization. For the first time in my life, I wasn't yielding. I wasn't softening the edges. I wasn't stepping aside to keep the peace. I wasn't his to command. Grant turned sharply, muttering under his breath, and left the office. Serena followed, her expression a mix of fury and disbelief, her world suddenly unprotected by the safety net she had always assumed I would provide. Elise lingered at the doorway, fingers brushing the frame. I'm glad you're safe, she whispered, her first real acknowledgement of me in years. Then she, too, walked away. The door clicked shut behind them, quiet, precise, final. I exhaled, slow and steady, feeling the weight lift from my chest. Not the weight of confrontation, but the weight of history, the years spent bending, apologizing, absorbing, shrinking. I turned toward the window, the city spreading wide beneath me, every light a reminder that there was a whole world beyond the limits of my family's expectations. For the first time in my life, the the silence they left behind didn't feel like punishment. It felt like authority. It felt like choosing myself. It felt like the beginning of a life that finally belonged to me. That night, when I returned to my apartment, the air felt different, lighter, almost fragile in its stillness. My phone lay silent on the counter, no longer pulsing with demands or accusations. For the first time in years, I didn't brace myself before looking at it. I simply set my keys down and let the quiet settle around me like a soft, unfamiliar fabric. Freedom, I realized, doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the absence of noise that once defined you. The city outside my window moved with its usual rhythm, cars drifting through the Denver night, lights flickering across buildings, snow dissolving into the dark. I pressed my palm to the cold glass and watched the world continue without expectation. It struck me how different this felt from my childhood home. There, silence had been something sharp, something meant to correct or contain me. Here, silence felt structural, supportive, like the beams of a place finally built for me. I made tea and carried the warm mug out onto the balcony. The air was crisp, brushing against my skin with the same gentle honesty I had spent my whole life craving. I wrapped my hands around the mug, letting the steam rise, letting the night breathe around me. No one was texting me. No one was calling. No one was waiting for me to fix something they had broken. That absence felt like a door opening. I thought of Elise, my mother, her quiet question lingering in the back of my mind. Are you safe? It was the only message that hadn't asked something from me. For years I mistook distance for failure, silence for rejection, and responsibility for love. But standing there under the faint glow of the city lights, I understood something cleaner, truer. Sometimes distance is the only form of love you can offer yourself. Sometimes stepping away is the only way to breathe. Inside, my apartment glowed softly, the folded jacket on the chair, the stack of work files, the ordinary little markers of a life shaped by my choices and no one else's. These small, quiet things felt more like home than any holiday photo ever had. For the first time, I wasn't the shadow in my own story. I was in the background. I was simply me. And that was enough. I took a slow sip of tea, feeling the heat bloom across my chest. The memory of my family's faces, Grant's fury, Serena's disbelief, Elise's sorrow floated somewhere at the edges of my mind, but they no longer defined the moment. They were pieces of a past I had finally released, anchors I had learned to unhook. Liberation wasn't loud or triumphant. It was a deep breath held for too many years, finally exhaled. A car moved along the street below, headlights sweeping across the buildings in a slow arc before slipping into darkness. Watching it disappear, I felt no pull toward the life behind me. No guilt. No shame. Only clarity. The boundary I had drawn was not a punishment. It was a truth. A clean, irrevocable truth. My life belongs to me now. When I finished my tea, I stepped inside, closed the balcony door, and let the latch click softly into place. That small sound was more powerful than any confrontation earlier. It was the sound of a life chosen deliberately, without apology. A life not shaped by expectation but by intention. People think the hardest part of letting go is the act itself. But standing in my quiet apartment, I realize they're wrong. The hardest part is recognizing how long you've carried a weight that was never yours and accepting that setting it down isn't selfish. It's survival. It's self-respect. It's the first step toward becoming who you were always meant to be. The silence wrapped around me, no longer heavy, no longer sharp. It didn't demand anything. It didn't punish. It didn't echo. It simply held me, spacious and steady. For the first time in my life, silence didn't feel like absence. It felt like freedom.